Welcome back. We are going to start with Chapter 11, which is going to cover stress and then worker well-being. So let's jump in. So first off, it's important to make sure that we're using the terms stress and strains correctly. A lot of times people use the word stress when they really mean strains. So stress is a force that pushes psychological or physical function beyond its range of stability. It could be something in the environment that's causing this kind of stress. It could be something psychological that is causing the stress within the individual. So there are a lot of different sources of stress, and we'll talk about that. But the idea is that stress leads to strain, which is the group of undesirable personal outcomes that may come as a result of having been under stress, right? So a lot of times people say that they are stressing, and what I think they mean is experiencing strain because they're having these undesirable personal outcomes where they're distracted, or they're having headaches, or they're feeling depressed or anxious or something like that. So sources of stress, especially at the workplace, we could be talking about intrinsic work factors, right? There are things about some jobs that are just inherently stressful. Some jobs are really noisy. Some jobs occur in, a lot of heat or a lot of cold. Those are stressors. Some kinds of work are under time pressures or have a lot of weight that is placed on the outcome. I'm thinking of like a lawyer. If you're defending someone, you could imagine, the stress that would be intrinsic to that work. There are role variables that can be sources of stress at work. We've talked in the past about how having unclear roles can be very stressful. Not knowing which part of the job is yours and which part is someone else's, that can be stressful. Having people hold you to expectations that you don't feel are really part of your role, that can be stressful. Interpersonal relationships can be stressful. Sometimes they are a source of comfort, but sometimes at work in particular, we can have relationships that we're sort of forced into through proximity that can be sources of stress. A person who is disagreeable, or a person who doesn't smell good, or a person who talks really loud on the phone while you're trying to concentrate on your work, or just a number of different kinds of things that are sort of these interpersonal. Sometimes we have coworkers who, they're just joking. They want us to believe, but the truth is they are kind of bullies, things like that. And then finally on that list is career development. If your goal is to move forward in the company or to find a job that's better suited to your skills or whatever, these things are stressful. Trying to do what is best for yourself while also trying to support your family or yourself, and also trying to, meet the needs of your organization. All those things can be stressful as they're kind of conflicting with each other. So these different kinds of stress sources can lead to organizational stress. The group, everybody around you might be put under more stress because they're all sharing the same intrinsic work factors, for example. Or if you're having role variable problems, other people in the organization probably are also. Those interpersonal relationships that are problematic for you are probably problematic for other people within the organization, right? So all of these things can lead to just sort of general organizational stress. Now, when we're under stress, there are coping strategies that we can invoke, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit more on another slide, but just to name them: problem-focused coping strategies and then emotion-focused coping strategies. I'm going to break those out and talk about those on another slide. But then those things can, organizational stress can lead to strains. And what we are worried about as industrial and organizational psychologists are not just the impacts on the organization, right? Where you end up with a person who has these job-related strains where they're not very happy with their job, or they're not performing very well, or they're not very motivated, or they have increased absences as they're attempting to avoid this stressful situation. We're not just concerned about how it directly impacts the organization. We're also worried about the employee, right? So we've got, emotion-related strains. So you can see in the employee that they're experiencing emotional exhaustion. They're just done. I don't know about you guys. Like I said, I'm recording this during the pandemic. I say that in just about every video. And I got to say, there are times when, this is my job and I have been emotionally exhausted during this process. And so, there are so many expectations for us as professors for supporting students, and absolutely zero, I am telling you, absolutely nothing has been done to support faculty at all. We are at home providing all of our own materials to convert ourselves to online learning. We were told to hold Zoom sessions regardless of what our circumstances are for doing that. When I raised the issue of could I run my Zoom session from my office at school so I could be secure on a good internet, I was told I can't use my office. So the message was, figure it out. You're on your own. And I have to say that after 5 weeks of the spring quarter under those circumstances, it became emotionally exhausting for me. It did make me not even want to work. And so, normally I'm a very satisfied employee, but this really nearly broke me. And as I'm recording this, we're in week 8 of the quarter, and I'm rallying and trying to get done by the end of the quarter. And I'm hearing from students who are experiencing similar kinds of just being done. It's going on too long, too much isolation, you get this sense of just this emotional exhaustion. It's just been too much. There's, depression that can come from that, irritability where, we go back to that possibly being a source of stress in our interpersonal relationships, right? If I'm feeling cranky because of the strain that I'm under, I might bark at my colleague, and that's going to contribute to stress in the organization. And then there might be this overall reduced self-esteem that might go with it, where we start to think, gosh, I can't even do this job correctly. And I just can't, everybody else seems to be functioning just fine. My mom was just talking the other day about how she was out and we all have to wear masks when we're out. And so she has her mask on and she's feeling, awful having her mask on. Her glasses are steaming. She's feeling like she can't breathe correctly. And she's looking around. She's like, everybody else seems to be doing fine with their masks on. It must be me. And then she realized she saw somebody like pull their mask open a little bit at the bottom so they could breathe better. One of the employees reassured her that his glasses steam up, and it made her feel better. It literally made her feel better. But it's a good example of how a lot of times when we look around at everybody else and it seems like they're doing fine in any circumstance, whatever we're talking about, and at work, it seems like, well, that person's coping fine. It can make us feel worse and make us feel bad about ourselves as we think we're the only ones having that experience. So it can reduce our self-esteem, at least temporarily, while we're going through this kind of stressor. The loss of, I like to call it the loss of agency that we experience oftentimes when we're under a stressor that we can't really avoid, can lower our self-esteem because it makes us feel like, there's nothing we can do. And as, adults and people who have been able to make decisions for ourselves pretty decently, to be in a situation at work or in a situation in the world where it feels like you don't get to make decisions and it doesn't really matter what you think, can really lower your self-esteem, at least temporarily. Physiological strains are going to manifest themselves, at least with regard to work, in increased illnesses. The person may be having absences in part because they really are physically getting sick more often. Being under stress, the strain of being under stress can lower our immune system response and actually make us more vulnerable to illness. There are physiological changes that go along with being under chronic stress. The strain will manifest itself as cardiovascular effects, right? Where the person's blood pressure goes up, their heart rate goes up. They may experience chest pains. These kinds of things can be signs that the person is under chronic stress and they're showing the strain. Now, I wanted to elaborate a little bit and talk about some of these sources of stress. So I've mentioned, loud conditions, cold conditions, hot conditions, things like that. I'd like to add on things like working long hours can be very stressful. Having excessive travel, prior to the travel ban, there were people who, were flying, to different cities weekly. And, this kind of excessive travel can be very stressful. There's always that time pressure. There's always a strange bed. Just this general lack of control is really a big source of stress when you feel like you have to be doing things that you don't necessarily want to be doing. Now, Karasek's demand control model of stress says that the psychological demands of work plus the employee's decision latitude are what combined will determine the degree of stress that the person is experiencing. And so if the person's job is very psychologically demanding, but they have control over how much they invest into that psychological demand, if they get to pick their own hours, or they get to decide how long it takes to complete this very demanding project, or things like that, it can result in less stress than if you have a high psychologically demanding job, plus you don't get to decide those kinds of factors that would help to relieve that stress. It's going to contribute to greater degrees of stress. So you can kind of, like a lot of jobs that are psychologically stressful, have psychological demands, don't lead to necessarily, negative strain outcomes in the employees, because the employees have a lot of decision. Like I gave the example of the lawyer defending a client. A lot of the time, you can stave off some of the effects of stress by having control in the situation. And so as the lawyer who's, trying to implement different strategies and all that, they're the one who's sort of in control and making the decisions. And so they may experience less stress as a result. With the role variables, I already mentioned about the role ambiguity issue, right? Or so, not knowing exactly what's expected of you in your role. But I would also like to mention role conflict, where some days at work, it's expected that you do these things, and other days at work, you're supposed to do those things plus something else, or, right? Like if it's inconsistent, if you don't know what to expect every day when you get to work, you really don't know what your role is going to be, that can be very stressful. Interpersonal relationships, it could be, I was kind of emphasizing coworkers. I forgot to mention supervisors in my example, because supervisors can be one of the biggest source of stress for employees. Supervisors can oftentimes be the thing that is stressful to an employee, because supervisors oftentimes have a lot of control and may seem like they are inconsistent or playing favorites or other kinds of things. So that can contribute a lot of stress to an employee's workday. And if you have to go through that supervisor to get where you want to go with your career advancement, or if that person makes you feel like your job security is weak or something, it can really contribute to stress. All right. So we're going to come back to the problem focus and the emotion focused coping later. But so some of the stressors and how to deal with them. One of the things that's happening in the 21st century is the average employee is having less and less supervision. As we've seen a flattening of organizational structures, we're seeing more employees that are being labeled sort of, partners at the company and different things. So they're having more, they're supposed to supervise themselves. And I like to call it self-regulation, right? Because you have to, as an individual employee, develop your own responsibilities. If you don't really understand what your responsibilities are, you have to actively seek out feedback from other people. A lot of times without a direct supervisor, no one's giving you feedback about what you're doing. And so you actually have to go ask somebody. It's sort of like no news is good news, I guess. Nobody's telling me I'm doing anything wrong, but it would be nice to know whether what I'm doing is on the right track or not. So there's a lot more emphasis on the employee being self-motivated, asking for the help or the feedback that they need. This team culture that we're going to talk about in the next chapter is a really big impact, on the workplace in the 21st century. We really are starting to see more and more organizations working in teams. And so the team culture can be really stressful. You guys have worked in teams, at least in school, if not in an employment situation. And you know that it's really difficult to manage the members of your team when you're working towards a goal. And so, one of the first things that a member of a team has to do is realize that, they have got some power in a team, and that they need to accept that and embrace it and use it as, an opportunity for the team to decide things together we've been assigned to do this task. And so we get to decide how it's done. I'm working on a team right now, and, at first, all of us were a little negative on what we were assigned to do because none of us wants to do it. But then we realized we get to decide how it's done. We're like, none of us wants to do the task, but we get to decide how it's done. Okay, well, that makes it actually a little bit better because we could take a lot of the parts that we don't like out of it, and we can just focus on the parts that we think are like the least objectionable or maybe even desirable. And so once we accepted that empowerment, that idea that the team gets to decide, it really helped to relieve a lot of the stress that we were all experiencing from being on this team that we don't want to do the task, let alone be on the team. So accepting empowerment can help relieve some of that stress. And then the other thing about the team culture is that a lot of times we have not had a lot of training in how to communicate with other team members in a way that gets our point across without, hurting their feelings or seeming aggressive or other things. And so working in a team helps us to improve those communication skills, sometimes by messing up, right? And then the rest of the team lets us know that we said something that was, not appropriate in the context of what we're doing. And that helps us to grow and develop, hopefully, unless we're really super tone deaf. And there are people like that, right, who just keep saying the same wrong things, no matter how much the team lets them know that you shouldn't be talking like that, or you're being really gruff, or you're being, you're dominating the floor, or you're doing all these things. Even when the team's really clear, okay, you've said enough, it's somebody else's turn. Some people are really tone deaf and they stick with it. So it's not, a guarantee that people are going to improve with their communication skills, but it's an opportunity. Focus on quality. So with teams, a lot of times, with the 21st century workplace, there's a bigger focus on quality work rather than just quantity. We don't have as many, manufacturing jobs as we did in the 20th century. And so today, the kinds of things that we do in the workplace are oftentimes focused on, if it is a manufacturing job, producing the best thing that we can, right? The highest quality. Or if it's, a more office type of workplace, the quality is on, doing good work, being creative, things like that. And so this company focus or this organization focus on quality really encourages employees to grow and develop so that they can produce quality work. One of the downsides of the 21st century office place or the workplace is that a lot of times there's not sort of somebody in the lead telling us what we need to be doing or what skills we need for this task or whatever. And so we have to, as employees, learn on our own, look for our own ways to improve our work. And so it's going to probably be done on their free time unless they can, make a proposal to their employer that, it's really important to my position in this organization that I take this training. My daughter was able to go to a marketing training seminar because her employer had hired her to be a marketer. And she's like, this will really improve my marketing skills if I get to go to this training seminar. And so they sent her. And, that's really a good example of the company would not have given her the skills that the seminar, gave her, but they would hope that she had them, right? And they weren't giving her much guidance on what they needed, but they were sort of, so you have to do it on your own. You have to look out and figure out what you need to do your best work. And that's a lot of onus again on the employee. Downsizing. It's a thing. I mean, it is what it is. We keep thinking to ourselves, okay, well, we've recovered from the recession. Okay, we've, recovered from that last hit. We've recover from that, and then a new hit comes. It just always does. And so what organizations typically are doing is trying to figure out how to operate as lean as they can, right? So the biggest cost in any organization is salaries. And so when cuts happen, organizations have to look at who's expendable. It's how the world works. We're going through it right now at our university. And so downsizing. We hear rumors whenever this kind of stuff is happening, like, we hear that there's a budget shortfall, and then rumors start flying. And people start talking about who's likely to be cut and what's likely to happen. And, these kinds of rumors always go around. So it's always good to kind of keep your ear to the ground and think about, like what might be the mood, what might be coming in the future. But you don't want to get obsessed with the rumors, because a lot of times they are exactly what they sound like. They're rumors. And it turns out that things don't pan out the way that the rumors said they were going to. One of the best things that an employee can do to protect themselves when downsizing is looming is make sure that the organization is really aware of how helpful and beneficial they are to the organization. You want to prove your worth. You want to be so good at what you're doing, committed to the organization and stuff, so that you're not even on the discussion board for getting rid of. And so you want to be aware, but you don't want to get paranoid. You just want to always be the best employee that you can to show that you're really valuable to the organization. Mergers and acquisitions. A lot of companies and organizations merge together. I just found out that my cell phone company officially merged with another cell phone company after at least a year of rumors about it and stuff like that. And finally they have merged. So imagine that if you were an employee at either of those cell phone companies, you're probably trying to figure out what's going to happen to the redundant employees from the two companies, right? Are they going to downsize? Are they going to, change the structure of the organizations? Like exactly what's going to happen. And so one of the best things that employees who are the two cell phone companies had at least a year that I'm aware of to become competent in their understanding of the other organization and start looking at where they fit in, across the two organizations and things like that. So learning about the other company rather than being scared and thinking, oh gosh, I hope it doesn't get me. Instead, if you learn about the company, you can be prepared for the organizational change and, make it really clear that you fit in and should stay, assuming you want to. Diversity. Of course, this is a really hot topic the week I'm recording this lecture. So I'm going to try not to get situationally specific because this lecture might endure on the internet for a while. But this is a really important issue for every organization and every individual. In the 21st century, there is a blossoming of diversity in the workplace anyway. But what is overlapping that is concerns about, implicit prejudices or explicit prejudices that might be present in the workplace. And so it's really important for all of us to look inside of ourselves and honestly assess our values and our prejudices that we bring with us to our workplace. A lot of times people feel like it's okay to carry prejudices against certain kinds of people because they're majority people or their age makes them, an okay target or, their style of dress or whatever. When I say reflect on your own values and prejudices, it's important to be aware of those things that you carry with you that are stereotyping individuals as if they are an example of whatever group we believe they're in based on shallow things like their appearance or their style of speech or their age or something like that. Anytime that you look at a person and think, I already think I know about them just by looking at them, that is a wake-up call that you're experiencing a prejudice, that you're stereotyping. So it doesn't matter who the target is. If you're doing that, you're experiencing a prejudice. And it's pretty hard to find a person who doesn't have a prejudice against somebody or some group. But being aware of it and thinking to ourselves how beneficial it is to have people who are different from us working with us and contributing ideas and looking at things from different angles, and making the workplace more interesting. And providing opportunities for our own personal growth. We spend 8 hours a day at work. Let's be honest, probably 9 if you actually eat in the lunchroom. And so, having the opportunity for personal growth through the friendships and the relationships that we can form at work, that's enormous. Not all of us get to travel. Not all of us have opportunities to grow, in other ways. And so having it there in our workplace and being able to, appreciate different perspectives and things like that, that's a gift. And so, being aware of the things that you might be carrying with you, and then all will help in a workplace. And then also think about how it could benefit you, how you could benefit other people, right? That's the beauty of diversity. We are definitely in a more international environment in the workplace these days. And so we have to be aware that our employer, who we got hired in our nice little state, in our country, we think we've got this job, and then we find out that it's an international company and they would really like you to spend 3 years living in another country. You have to really consider whether you want to move to another place, right? Because while I always think it would be awesome to teach abroad for a quarter, because then, for 3 months, you could really get involved in the culture. You could really, find out what it's like, and not just see tourist things, but literally sort of live the life there. But then be able to come home and not have missed out on like all the relationships that you have back home and things like that. That's the thing that a lot of times we forget about when we have the opportunity for an overseas assignment. We think about career advancement and, world experience and things like that. And we kind of forget that we might get there and get really super homesick or other kinds of things. It's a really good tip to remember that, if you're moving to another place, it takes about 6 months to kind of settle in. So it can be really difficult, and being prepared for that will help to smooth it. At least you're prepared. So that'll help you smooth it over. The other thing that's really become more common in the 21st century is innovative pay structures. So innovative pay structures may take the form of not necessarily a paycheck. It might take the form of commissions, or it might take the form of dividends, or it might take a variety of different forms. And so if when considering a position with an organization that has some kind of innovative pay strategy, a lot of times they'll say that in their ad, and it's code for we may not be giving you a paycheck, or we might be giving you a very small paycheck. It's really important as an employee to know what the strategy is, and to get performance reviews periodically, even more than when they were planning to, because that gives you sort of a little bit of a vision of how you fit in and how well you're doing, working toward this innovative pay strategy that may really pay off in the long run. All right. I think I've been talking a long time, so I'm going to stop here, and then we'll come back and talk about episodic versus chronic stress, and finally talk about the problem-focused versus emotion-focused problem solving, and blah, blah. So I will see you in the next lecture.